Good afternoon, and welcome to our New York Archives Magazine online speaker series. I am Josie Madison, editor of New York Archives. Today, we're joined by speaker Erin Tobin, who will share how Adirondack Architectural Heritage, also known as AARCH, works tirelessly to preserve and protect historic structures. Through stories of restoration and conservation, this presentation will highlight the importance of safeguarding the region's unique architecture for future generations. Erin Tobin is a well-known expert in the preservation community and served as Vice President for Policy and Preservation at the Preservation League of New York State until 2021, when she left to join Adirondack Architectural Heritage as Executive Director. While working at the Preservation League, she had directed public policy and technical service programs across New York State's 62 counties, leading a statewide preservation policy agenda and advocating for effective preservation policies at local, state, and national levels. Tobin holds a BA degree cum laude in architectural history from Binghamton University and an MS degree in historic preservation from the University of Pennsylvania. Adirondack Architectural Heritage is a private, nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and protecting the architecture and communities of the Adirondacks through education, action, and advocacy. At AARCH, Tobin advances the organization's strategic goals as Chief Operating, Development, and Finance Officer, as well as its primary spokesperson. She serves as the primary contact for special projects and preservation advocacy efforts, while overseeing the organization's robust preservation services and educational programs. Tom Ruller retired from his position as New York State Archivist in 2023. An active professional for 35 years, Tom is the author of several peer-reviewed journal articles and reviews on the use of technology in archives and the preservation of records in electronic form. Tom has been a consultant for several state governments and other organizations focusing on electronic records management and preservation. He remains actively engaged as a board member and steward of the Archives Partnership Trust. So for those of you who have joined us today, welcome. There will be a brief question and answer session at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many as we can at the end. And now I'm pleased to introduce Tom Ruller and Erin Tobin.
Thank you, Josie, and hello, Erin. I've been looking forward to this program for a while. I love the Adirondacks. Had an opportunity to hike around up there. I grew up in Gloversville, which is just at the very base of the Adirondacks. But one of the things that really amazes me about this enormous part of our state, and it really is an enormous stretch of land, is the diversity of the communities. And I think in the area of architecture, the architecture really helps tell that very diverse story. And the work that AARCH is doing really, I think, highlights all these different kinds of communities that developed or went away over the course of time in the Adirondacks. And so I'm really excited to hear what you're going to talk about and learn a little bit more about, again, the work that you're doing to preserve some structures that are at great risk and some structures that we all know about. So this is really exciting. So thank you for doing this today.
Oh, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Josie. I'm very excited to be here today, and I'll go ahead and get started. I can share my screen now, and
Great.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. As both Josie and Tom noted, my name is Erin Tobin, and I am the Executive Director of Adirondack Architectural Heritage. As Josie said, we're also known as AARCH, and I'm coming to you today from my office in Keysville, off of exit 34 off the Northway, just south of Plattsburgh in the beautiful Champlain Valley. Thank you so much to the Archives Partnership Trust for inviting me to speak this afternoon about our work saving and stewarding the architectural history of the Adirondacks. It's such a pleasure to be here and to talk about AARCH and all the great work that our team does. And I'll talk a little bit about us. And I have to say, looking at the registrant list and some of the people in the audience, I see some longtime AARCH friends and preservation friends, and hope to make some new ones today. So thank you for being here to listen to my talk today. So AARCH, in here you can see the bottom right is our office in Keysville. I'm sitting in it. And at the top is a picture of the Sable River in our hometown here. AARCH was founded in 1990 with a mission to promote better public understanding, appreciation, and stewardship of the Adirondacks' unique and diverse architectural heritage. Our full-time staff of 4, when we're fully staffed, will be about 5.5, are based in our Keysville office. Nolan Kuhl is our Educational Programs Director, Christine Bush is our Preservation Services Director, and Samantha Johnson, our Membership and Communications Director. And everything we do that I'll talk about today is very much of a team collaborative effort. We've got a great staff team here. Our office building on Keysville's Main Street that you see here was built circa 1849 for the offices of the Eagle Horsenail Company, which became the Sable Horsenail Company in 1864. And it remained the Sable Horsenail Company manufacturing horse nails until 1923. So these were the offices, and behind our office building, you see here, I don't know if the pointer works, but this is a historic stone mill building that was built around the same time. And these are rare survivors of mid-19th century water-powered industrial buildings, reflecting Keysville's and really the Adirondacks' industrial history. Both our office building, the stone arch bridge you see here in this photo, which I'm looking at out my window right now, and the stone mill behind were built of sandstone quarried from the banks of the Sable River. AARCH acquired our office building and the stone mill in 2008 and spent several years rehabilitating it for our offices. In 2022, shortly after I joined AARCH, we sold both buildings to a couple who she grew up in Keysville, and they leased the building back to us and are repurposing this stone mill, which we had bought with the office building to save and preserve. Repurposing it currently for occasional public events, such as the annual Keysville Community Arts Festival, and hopefully more. We've also just completed a park adjacent to that stone mill where you can overlook the river and all of the beautiful historic buildings that line Keysville streets. Let's see. So AARCH works to preserve the region's architecture and communities, and our service region includes all of the Adirondacks, including all of the counties that make up Adirondack Park. So we go all the way up to the Canadian border, all the way to Vermont, and include Lewis County, Fulton County. Gloversville is in our service region as well. So we work to preserve the region's architecture and communities through partnership and collaboration in education, action, and advocacy. Here are some photos representing ways in which we fulfill our mission through educational tours and programs, hands-on technical workshops, working with communities and individuals seeking to preserve their buildings and invest in their downtowns. We share information about funding and provide technical assistance. And we've preserved and interpreted Great Camp Santanoni, you see the drawing at the bottom there, in Newcomb, in partnership with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the town of Newcomb since our founding. And you'll hear more about all of these things as I continue the presentation. So our educational programs, and these are really, I think, one of the things that sets us apart from a lot of other preservation nonprofits is this really robust educational tour program that we have. And these programs showcase the architecture and built heritage of our region. We bring these cultural programs to year-round regional residents, and we draw heritage tourists to learn more about architecture in the Adirondacks. Just in 2023, so last year and similar to this year, we offered 31 day-long tours and hands-on workshops, 11 webinars and in-person talks. This year, we have 34 educational tours and traditional trade arts workshops. These programs examine architecture while exploring how history and place come together for our audience. And through highlighting our region's historic built environment, we build a constituency to support it and relationships with local nonprofits, municipalities, and homeowners. And this often leads to engagement in other areas of our work, such as advocacy and technical assistance. Our tours have changed the way in which some communities present themselves and their heritage in terms of marketing and planning. For example, we have worked leading tours in this community of Wanakena for years with a tour that highlights its history as a lumber community for the Rich Lumber Company and recent investments in the hamlet like Otto's Abode, which is a gallery and general store named after a gentleman who came to Wanakena in 1901 to work as a millwright for the Rich Lumber Company, and who then later helped secure the land that was used to establish New York State's Ranger School nearby. Since our founding, we've also brought attention to the importance of Adirondack rustic architecture through our summer tours. So I just showed a picture highlighting some hamlet and investment in a hamlet and industrial heritage. This is a photo of William West Durant's Camp Pine Knot in Racket Lake. And this Racket Lake tour is an annual favorite for our members and the public. Tour-goers visit this Camp Pine Knot, which was William West Durant's first camp on Racket Lake's Long Point, and what many refer to as the start of the Adirondack rustic style. It was built following his first visit to Racket Lake in 1876. And you're all just getting the highlights here. So I'm trying to show the broad depth, but I could talk for an hour on probably each one of these slides. So we'll have to give you, so you're getting just a flavor. Here is Santa's Workshop in Wilmington. And we've provided technical assistance to the owner of Santa's Workshop for several years. This is cited sometimes as the first amusement park in the country. And Lake Placid businessman Julian Reese reached out to Jay native Arto Monaco in the late 1940s to design and develop this storybook themed site. Arto Monaco was born in 1913, and he began drawing at an early age and attended the Pratt Institute in New York City, later working for MGM Studios. He created Santa's Workshop, seen here, on the slopes of Whiteface Mountain, not far from his studio on Upper J. Santa's Workshop opened in 1949 and has been open ever since then. We have, in addition to providing technical assistance and working with the property owner, we've highlighted the extraordinary history of this special place through tours. And we hope that the owner might consider a possible nomination to the National Register of Historic Places to research and document the history of this really pretty incredible place. And if we had a non-virtual audience, I would ask anybody to raise their hands if they have a childhood history of going here. Tom, I saw you nodding. It's always fun when I show this slide. People are talk about all their memories going there, sometimes working there. It's a much beloved historic site. So we also visit places going beyond the Blue Line. This year, in late May, we traveled to Buffalo and explored the connections between the Adirondacks and Buffalo. We toured some of the city's iconic architectural masterpieces, and also some kind of lesser known but equally fascinating and important places. Here in the upper left, this was a nonprofit that has transformed a historic church into a center for construction trades training. This is called Assembly House 150 and is just fascinating. If you Google Assembly House 150 and see their work, it's quite remarkable. In the lower right, this tour focused on the works of prolific architecture firm Green and Wicks, who both had Adirondack connections, particularly at the Wilmert Club and Adirondack League Club near Old Forge. This picture here is the Georgia Foreman House, which is privately owned, designed by Green and Wicks in Buffalo. And I took this picture from the extraordinary gardens that were designed by the renowned female American landscape architect, Ellen Biddle Shipman. Ellen Biddle Shipman was a contemporary of other women, female landscape architects, Beatrix Farrand and Marion Kruger Coffin. These three women were part of the first generation of female landscape architects to receive renown in that male-dominated field. And so it was quite fun. This house was built for a woman, for Georgia Foreman, and her granddaughter was there at the tour. The architecture firm were two men. She hired this extraordinary woman landscape architect to design the beautiful gardens. I'm a big fan of that particular building. It's gorgeous. So we also have had for the last 3 years a series of hands-on trades workshops. Here you see a picture on the left of our 2-day plaster restoration workshop at the historic Graves Mansion in Osable Forks. And then this year we had a day-long plumbing workshop at the Adirondack Experience, which is the museum on Blue Mountain Lake. Really just doing hands-on. These are how-to workshops for people who own historic homes, who want to be able to do some of these repairs themselves. Through our Engelhardt Education Fund, which was named after our founding executive director, Stephen Engelhardt, we produced a coloring book of the historic architecture of Keysville. And I mentioned the Keysville Community Arts Festival that's held in the Stone Mill. And here you see a picture of our coloring book table and the mill in the distance. This is an annual event that's put on by our friends at ADK Action. And we participate by sharing our coloring book and opening up our library and offices to the public. You can find this coloring book on our website. It has historic information about some of the most iconic buildings in Keysville, along with pages you can color in. And then we work on National Register nominations to document the history of our region. This is one of the nominations that was put on the National Register of Historic Places this year, the St. Lawrence County Government Complex in Canton. And this is something, as I mentioned, with Santa's workshop, if they might look towards a National Register nomination, we're working on a nomination in Osable Forks and the community of Schuyler Falls, so that we can work with communities who do wish to document their historic architecture. And then we also host webinars. We try to do these in the off season when we're not out on foot, leading tours and doing workshops and giving in-person talks. These are two of the webinars we have held in 2024, earlier this year, exploring Fort Henry's 20th century African-American community, and talking about architectural salvage with our partners and friends at Historic Ithaca and Historic Albany Foundation. So we find webinars are a great way to bring people together during the winter months and talk about interesting topics, and we can kind of spread our speakers out a little bit more, as I'm sure, as you see with the Archives Partnership Trust. Every year we honor award-winning historic preservation projects through our annual Preservation Awards program. Here are our 4 award winners for this year. And we like to move this program around. It's usually in late September, or the last few years, late September, early October. And we've been holding it at a prior award-winning location. So this year we were at War Cannon Spirits in Crown Point. And here you see the Frontier Town A-frame in the town of North Hudson in the top left corner. White Pine Camp service quarters that are in Paul Smith's, which was a reconstruction after a tragic fire, in the top right. On the bottom right is Crystal Spring Farm in the community of Essex. And then on the bottom left is the Brown Swan Club that's now part of the Lodge at Scroon Lake in the community of Scroon Lake. And we have served really almost from the beginning as a fiscal sponsor for grassroots preservation efforts in Friends groups. We were a lead advocate for the preservation of historic fire towers in the Forest Preserve, and have served as a fiscal sponsor for fire tower friends groups for many years. Often we host them while they work on their 501c3, and then they launch and become their own nonprofit. These two photos are of fire towers for which we're still support their friends groups, the Friends of Hurricane and the Friends of Poca Moonshine. And if you haven't hiked Hurricane Mountain and Poca Moonshine, put it on your list, because those are two of my very favorites. And it's not just because I'm biased, but they're just wonderful, wonderful hikes.
And I'll read the wonderful essay about the Hurricane Mountain Fire Tower in the New York Archives magazine, which you can.
Yes. And more recently, we've taken on 2 additional fiscal sponsorships for a couple active grassroots preservation projects, stepping in to provide technical support and a fundraising platform for these preservation initiatives that are within our mission. This is the Thomas Memorial AME Zion Church in Watertown, which is just outside our service area in Jefferson County, but we are the closest historic preservation nonprofit, and so we do work in Watertown and Jefferson County on occasion as well when we're called to. This church is a testament to the struggles and achievements of Watertown's African American community, with a congregation that originally formed in 1878. Made of railroad workers, some of whom had sought freedom, and many who were active abolitionists. Under the leadership of Frank Thomas, for whom this church is named, members of the congregation built this church themselves in 1909. And descendants of Frank Thomas continue to live in the community today, linking its past and present. The church, even though it closed for worship in 2012, the church long served as an anchor for the African American community of Jefferson County. And it's been without a caretaker since 2017, but an active coalition has been formed to save it from demolition. And here you see Shamika Ingram of the organization Preservation in Color, who's been the lead organizer of this grassroots coalition, bringing us together to stabilize the church. When I say that the congregants built the church, I mean they formed the cement blocks that are the structure of the building. They literally built the church. AARCH has the honor and privilege of serving as a fiscal sponsor for the project's stabilization grants. They've received, the Thomas Memorial Project has received a grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Preserving Black Churches program, and the Preservation League of New York State's Preservation Opportunities Fund. And that's with the goal right now to, again, stabilize the tower and the building, while working within the community to find a use that will best serve its current neighborhood today. And I think ready to launch, figuratively speaking, we've been working with the Grassroots Coalition in Blue Mountain Lake, seeking to preserve the steamboat Tuscarora. On the left, you can see it in its heyday as a steamboat, and here on the right, you can see her up on shore during a historic American engineering record documentation project that I'll talk about in a moment. Last year, we became the fiscal sponsor for the Friends of the Tuscarora fundraising to relocate the steamboat off of private property into a site in the hamlet of Blue Mountain Lake that's more publicly accessible, with a goal to interpret its role in the history of the region in an attractive and accessible exhibit space. It's been thoroughly documented. The Tuscarora has been thoroughly documented through the National Park Service's Historic American Engineering Record, which was funded by a grant from the 1772 Foundation, again, for which we were able to serve as a fiscal sponsor. And those drawings created through the HARE project will guide her restoration. It both is a reminder of the transportation network of the early 20th century, but then it was turned into a bunkhouse in the mid 20th century privately. So it's this fascinating collection of history of the Adirondacks and Blue Mountain Lake. In the Adirondacks, these boats, steamboats like the Tuscarora, operated on the Fulton chain of lakes, Gruen Lake, Lake Placid, the Saranac Lakes, and Blue Mountain Lake. And the Tuscarora is really the lone survivor as the last large vessel that illustrates this commercial water travel of the Gilded Age, built in the spring of 1900 in Staten Island. Last year, AARCH added funding support to our toolbox of ways that we fulfill our mission. We received a grant from the Paul Brune Historic Revitalization Grant Program of the National Park Service, and we began the Adirondack Rural Revitalization Program. This program funds capital rehabilitation projects that contribute to their community's character, follow preservation standards, and create economic development through supporting new or continuing uses of publicly accessible historic buildings. We funded 11 projects in 8 counties, totaling almost $681,000. And shown here is the historic Salem Courthouse in Washington County. Our grant to this project is funding the Great Hall rehabilitation and fire safety upgrade that will rehabilitate the most heavily used publicly accessible spaces and improve fire safety across the building. The Historic Salem Courthouse Preservation Association, whose leaders are shown here with the town supervisor, myself and my colleague Christine Bush, our Preservation Services Director. The Historic Salem Courthouse Association's mission is to deliver programs and services that open doors to new opportunities for people of all ages and to build a stronger local community. So it's been a real joy to be able to support these infrastructure investments for organizations that serve such a really important community purpose. And here is Camp Santinoni. We were formed in part to save this particular site, along with many others. This is Camp Santinoni, shown here from Newcomb Lake. Taking this picture once back is to Newcomb Lake. And Camp Santinoni remains standing today thanks to the effort of a brilliant coalition and behind-the-scenes advocacy that included the work of so many people. With Camp Santinoni's history, it welcomed its first guest in 1893 and is one of the earliest examples of what became known as an Adirondack Great Camp, with over 45 buildings on its campus at its height. So I had shown a picture of Camp Pine Knot a few slides ago by William S. Durant. Camp Santinoni kind of shows the evolution of that Adirondack rustic style in the following about 15 years. It was built by Robert and Anna Prine from Albany as a retreat from the city. And here's a photo drawing of their house in Albany and Robert and Anna. At the time Camp Santinoni was built, the Prines lived on Willett Street in Albany in a house designed by architects Potter and Robertson. And it was architect Robert Robertson who designed that main building at Camp Santinoni and was college friends with Robert Prine. And here you get a sense of the entirety of the Santinoni Preserve, which is nearly 13,000 acres in Newcomb. This was all of the property that the Prines owned at the height, once they acquired all the land that created this preserve. This closer view, and you can see somewhat outlined in green here, shows the 32-acre Camp Santinoni historic area. And this was created in 2000 simultaneously with the Historic Area Unit Management Plan and designation as a National Historic Landmark. I'll talk in a moment about the kind of the challenges and opportunities of historic preservation and saving historic buildings inside of the Adirondack Forest Preserve and within the restrictions of the Blue Line as state land. So Here is, this is Route 28 in here, and you would drive that through Newcomb heading to Long Lake. And here is the gatehouse complex right off of the road. And then this whole drive is a walking or biking path. Right now it's a snowshoe cross-country ski path. It's not for motorized vehicles. And the main camp complex is about 4.5 miles in, overlooking Newcomb Lake. And it was the first part of the Great Camp that was built by the Prynes. You can also see they had a farm complex and a gatehouse complex. They built these complexes in somewhat reverse order. So the main camp was built first, then the farm complex evolved, and the gate lodge complex. This is the layout of the main camp that resembles a plan of connecting buildings that have no one grand entrance, but connect to nature through a series of interconnecting porches, totaling 5,000 square feet. And so from here, you would look out onto Newcomb Lake. And this plan in particular sort of resembles a bird in flight, which was inspired by Robert Pryne's travel to Japan with his father, who was an ambassador and a diplomat in the 19th century. More than 1,500 spruce trees were logged from outside the immediate area of the main camp, but nearby. And they, here at San Giannone, the spruce logs were stripped of bark and varnished, which gave it a more finished appearance than you might see at places like Camp Pine Knot or other earlier Adirondack Great Camps. Here's the main front room that overlooks Newcomb Lake, was used for lounging and occasionally for dancing. But here's a historic image of that front porch. Again, the lake is off here to the left. And that was really the principal space where the Prynes and their guests spent time. Anna in particular, Mrs. Pryne really wanted to be out in nature, had this connection to being outside, whereas Robert Pryne, after finishing the main camp, really turned his attention to the farm and had an interest in developing a gentleman's farm, as was fashionable at the time. So he bought several parcels working back towards the hamlet of Newcomb on the north side of Newcomb Lake Road, and then acquiring additional land across the street for a barn. And this is one of the original farmhouses that he acquired, but then he added to it, made it a little bit more fashionable for the era. And then across the street, he built this beautiful barn from land that was purchased in the spring of 1896. Camp San Giannone, because of the development of the farm, is one of the few relatively self-sufficient great camps. Robert Pryne worked with Edward Burnett, who was a noted gentleman's farm developer, and on the barn and the dairy building, which you'll see in a moment here across the street, to provide fresh milk for the guests at Great Camp San Giannone and also for the community, which was a real luxury. This dairy building, known as the Creamery, was built in 1904 and was the centerpiece of the farm complex, along with the barn, directly across the road from each other. It's believed that the noted New York City architecture firm Delano and Aldrich designed the building because they were also working on other San Giannone projects at the time, such as the Gate Lodge, you'll see in a few minutes. So at a time that tuberculosis and influenza were infecting hundreds of thousands of people, the San Giannone Dairy provided safe milk and dairy products to the Prynes and their guests. And some Newcomb residents still have glass milk bottles with the San Giannone label in raised letters. And here's that Gate Lodge I just mentioned. Robert Pryne wanted to keep his camp complex private and designed this Gate Lodge as a point of entry. It was built in 1905, also designed by Delano and Aldrich. And the road here wound through the Gate Lodge arch before continuing up the farm and main camp. And again, if we were live, I would ask for a show of hands to see who has visited Camp Santanoni. It is the only publicly owned and accessible great camp where you can tour the buildings. It is just a really, truly remarkable site. Now the path goes straight up the hill. There's still a drive that winds around the gate lodge, but you would continue up the hill and you can walk and bike in. And I'll talk about our winter weekends at the end. In 1953, after a period of decline in which Camp Santanoni was operated by the Prime Family Trust, it was sold to the Melvins of Syracuse. Here's Crandall and Myron Melvin, banker and lawyer. And they were a prominent Syracuse family who owned Santanoni for the following 20 years. And they deserve a tremendous amount of credit for investing in the buildings of Great Camp Santanoni, making important repairs, and really maintaining them in a way that they hadn't been maintained in the waning years of the Prime family's ownership. Unfortunately, we have relatively few photos of this time, but they really were wonderful stewards of the buildings. In the early 1970s, the Melvins entered into discussions about selling the camp to the Nature Conservancy. And this is a period in Adirondack preservation history that I find quite fascinating. It's the establishment of the Adirondack Park Agency. There's tremendous interest in the state acquiring land for the forest preserve. And this is a period when many large private landowners end up donating land or selling land to the state to become part of the forest preserve, like the Melvins did for the almost 13,000 acre estate that was owned, that is now the Santanoni Preserve. Out of those 13,000 acres, there's only a 32 acre historic area. So the Melvins worked with the Nature Conservancy, and through public and private fundraising, the Nature Conservancy raised the money to purchase the land and then transfer it, pass it to the state. In 1972, the state becomes the fourth owner of the property, and with the Nature Conservancy, it's a very short-lived third. And it's added to the Adirondack Forest Preserve. So with this, there enters into a period of uncertainty about Great Camp Santanoni's future. At the time of acquisition, the Department of Environmental Conservation had a management and land use plan that included 1,500 acres as a special purpose area. And their thinking was that it would become a training center for personnel, general public visits, storage and supplies. The gate lodge and a building next to the gate lodge would be used for caretaker housing. But really, as one would expect, it was the land that was a priority for DEC. And through the 1970s, New York State acquired other great camps, such as Top Ridge, Nahasni, and Sagamore. And they really felt that whatever happened at Great Camp Santanoni would become precedent. And so you can see there is coverage in the New York Times in 1975 about the state buying great camps. The Preservation League of New York State was formed during this period and advocated for Great Camp Sagamore and Great Camp Santanoni, and ultimately helped save the buildings at Great Camp Sagamore, but also convening a conference, the Preservation League, to sponsor a survey of the great camps and discuss what to do with these historic places that had been acquired by the state. And Santanoni, Top Ridge, Nahasni, and Sagamore all ended up with different outcomes. So Santanoni, of course, is part of the Adirondack Forest Preserve. Great Camp Sagamore is run by the Sagamore Institute, which is a nonprofit and is open to the public. Top Ridge is privately owned, recently in the news. And Nahasni is no more. It was cleared, and now if you visit Lake Lila, you won't see any buildings. So During this time when they were trying to figure it out, trees grew through the historic Great Camp. There were demolition orders on the buildings. Those demolition orders were not acted upon, thank goodness. And then while the state was trying to figure out what to do with the buildings, there was a meeting convened by one of our founders, Howie Kirschenbaum, at a conference held by the Preservation League of New York State in 1990 to discuss the importance of forming a group focused on preservation in the Adirondacks and talking about what to do at Camp Santanoni. Having buy-in from the town of Newcomb town supervisor, George Cannon, who the late George Cannon was key to the preservation effort. After AARCH was founded in 1990, we worked with the town. We was not me, but my predecessors, and really were responsible for much of the repair work that kept the buildings up, made the necessary repairs, did really kind of emergency efforts. At this time, we also began a preservation internship program, which continues today, working with the town of Newcomb, which funds that. So every year we look for new interns for Camp Santanoni. I think I saw that one of our past interns, summer staff, might be on this webinar. I don't know if she was able to join. And actually two. Here you see Stephen Engelhardt in the middle here, accepting a check from the Preservation League of New York State for a historic structure report. This is the dairy, that creamery building. And here are, this was one of our board members, Stephanie Noble, who was a Santanoni intern leading a tour. In 2000, we AARCH celebrated with the state and the town of Newcomb and the Preservation League dedication of its National Historic Landmark status. And then we had a tragic fire and lost the barn in 2004. And so when you go to the site today, you will only see the ruins of that beautiful historic barn that was such a centerpiece of the farm complex. Within my first month of my position at AARCH, our big capital project at Camp Santanoni, which was a new roof for the main camp, and it's shown here from above. That's the main lodge, and then the gate lodge. That project was completed just as I was starting. Our attention turned to fire protection. With the loss of the barn 20 years ago, fire protection for the remaining buildings has been a really key priority for us, for the state, for the town, and really the public. And so through generous support from the New York State's Environmental Protection Fund, support of our legislators and the governor, we've been able to receive funding to plan and move towards implementing a fire protection plan for the main camp here, which, as I mentioned, is 4.5 miles into the forest preserve. Right now, with well over a foot of snow on the ground, emergency vehicles could not make the trip in. It would have to be a snowmobile, which would only be allowed in case of absolute emergency, and that won't put out a fire. So, and we continue to run our intern program. These are interns from a couple of years ago, but every year we bring in summer staff, summer interns, summer staff to live at the Gate Lodge, to interpret the site, leading daily tours, to work on maintenance projects and hands-on restoration projects, learning trades and skills like historic window repair you see here. But the fight and the conversations continue. It's not, Great Camp Santanoni. It's not a one and done. As the state continues to, what's happening really right now with multiple properties is that when the state acquired particular parcels of land in the 70s and 80s, they would grant long-term tenancy to the people that they acquired the parcels from. This was what happened at DeBar Pond Lodge, which you see down here. in the town of Duane in Franklin County, and was the case for another site that we're looking at called the Jarvis Cottage, which is a cure cottage further north on Lake Cushaqua, and for which there is no use. We worked to save DeBar Pond Lodge. There was a nonprofit that was formed that was going to take it over. In this instance, we ultimately did not have the support of the town, and so any attempt to create a land use amendment to take that out of the park, it could not move forward, unfortunately. So we are still talking to the State Department of Environmental Conservation, hoping that this beautiful site overlooking DeBar Pond, that the building is saved. Both DeBar Pond Lodge and this is Camp Intermission, which was the William Morris house of the William Morris Talent Agency. These buildings were both designed by William Diston, who was a 20th century architect of the Adirondacks, from the Adirondacks. And unfortunately, even in situations, so in DeBar Pond Lodge's situation, it's similar to Santanoni, where it's inside of the wild forest area and is a non-conforming building. Here at Camp Intermission, this is up at Camp Colby and is part of a camp, a DEC camp. But the State Department of Environmental Conservation is trying to figure out what to do with it, how to maintain it, what use to put in it. Of course, they are not charged with historic preservation or running a museum or a historic site. And it's an ongoing challenge for all historic buildings owned by the state or frankly by anybody. But when you have the overlay of the Adirondack Park Agency and the Forest Preserve on it, it creates a special challenge. And that's my talk. I wanted to make sure to leave some time for questions. Here's a photo of the group from last year's plaster workshop outside of the historic Graves Mansion in Sable Forks. And I hope that I've inspired some of you to come and join us. Thank you for your time. And you can learn more about AARCH on our website, which is aarch.org. We have an email list you can subscribe to. We have social media pages you can follow, or you can become a member if you're not already, and help support the work that we do.
Erin, thank you. I find I'm a history person, and what I love about architecture and the connection to my real business, which is archives, is you get the opportunity not just to read about and understand who these people were, but you can see the physical evidence of where they were and what it was all about. And the Adirondacks is, as I said at the very beginning, such a wonderful and diverse story. There's the story of African Americans trying to settle the center of the Adirondacks under Garrett Smith's largesse, and then the communities that sprang up around there. There's the industrial and commercial exploitation of the Adirondacks and the remnants of what that exploitation gave us. And then there's the stories like Great Camp Santanoni, as well as the more humble places of just the people that lived and worked or escaped to the Adirondacks. All of that is still available for people to go and see. Maybe not in February, but it's there. And there's so many great, rich stories. You could spend, as you said at the very beginning, days and days talking about all the things that make up this wonderful, wonderful place. And I think the challenges that you talked about, which is the challenge of preserving the Adirondack and the Adirondack Park and the forever wild nature of what makes it a unique and special place, but also being able to interpret it because people continue to have lived there and will continue to live there. So I have to say thank you. Thank you very much for this. I know we do have a couple of questions, so I know Josie's going to join us in a second and filter some of those out.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that presentation. It was really, really fascinating. We actually have just one comment, but it's a fun one, which is that Robert Prine, who I think this comment is referring to the father, the ambassador, is buried at Albany Rural Cemetery, and his monument was designed by the architect Richardson, right? Who I think is who you said designed Santanoni.
Robert Robertson designed Great Camp Santanoni.
Oh,
But also there are monuments designed by H. Richardson as well.
maybe that's who this is referring to. But that is also another beautiful place to visit, is the Albany Rural Cemetery.
Yes.
But I think that's the only question we have from the audience. I'm a little bit interested in knowing more about how do you uncover the history of these buildings? Where do you look for information about the history of these buildings?
That's a great question. And we come at the history from a variety of perspectives, whether it's planning for an educational program or researching a National Register nomination or looking up a place before we provide technical assistance. And so a lot of it is working with our colleagues. We have a very large region. Our service area is the state of Vermont, basically. So we work closely with local historians, academics, community members, researching in archives. So our educational programs director, Nolan Kuhl, is a public historian. Christine Bush, who's our preservation services director, does our National Register nominations, and she'll go into archives. She and Nolan often work very closely together to look at historic maps and documents and do research. But also, again, it's a collaborative, history is a collaborative process, and to kind of look and see all the different great research, like Amy Godine and the history of Timbuktu, for example.
Mm-hmm. But
Yeah,
local
and I
governments
think
are. Go ahead,
that's
Josie.
something that we find over and over again, is that it's always a collaborative effort to piece together the past, and you find bits of evidence here and bits of evidence there, and it takes a lot of people working on something to really make the story come to life. Oh, one of our guests wanted to let you know that his parents drove from Hudson, New York, to take him to Santa's workshop in the mid 1950s. I'm sure we have other stories like that among the audience as well. I know I went there also, so.
And that's another great Adirondack story. You've got the A-frame from Frontier Town, which some of us on this call spent some time at. You've got Santa's workshop. We've still got some of the remnants of Storytown that is now the Great Escape, and Charles Wood's efforts to try to leverage, I guess, the great idea of Santa's workshop. But that's a whole other dimension of the story in the Adirondacks. It's hiking, it's nature, it's all of that, but it's also these fun places that gave kids like me very memorable experiences. And again, thank you for your efforts at preserving some of those. The A-frame at Frontier Town really almost brought some tears to my eyes. But
Be great.
I think there's a sense of wonder to be had there in the Adirondacks for people of all ages.
well said, Josie. Well said.
I want to take I was going to mention our Santanoni winter weekends.
Yes.
Because AARCH works with, they're a partnership with the town of Newcomb and State Department of Environmental Conservation and the Adirondack Interpretive Center at SUNY ESF, right down the road from us. But Martin Luther King Day weekend, President's Day weekend, and the weekend around St. Patrick's Day is how it's easiest to remember. Our buildings out at our main camp will be open for tours between 10 a.m. and 3 o'clock. And so you can cross-country ski or snowshoe. Again, there will be many feet of snow on the ground. It's a snowshoe. Cross-country skiing is a must. But thanks to the generosity of the Adirondack Interpretive Center, we will have snowshoes available if people wish to borrow them. And And then there will be open at the artist studio out at the main camp. Once you reach that 4.5-mile main camp, it will be warm and open with hot chocolate and coffee and tea available, so you can dry out your mittens and take off your ski boots and enjoy your lunch by a warm fire before heading back. So that's a real treat, and I hope that anybody who's interested can come out and can come out and join.
And they can find more information about it on your website, right?
Yes.
AARCH.org, which Josie has conveniently put into the chat here.
Yes, it's right on our homepage on our calendar.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much, Erin and Tom, for joining us today, and Erin for sharing all this wonderful information about the work that you're doing. And thank you to everyone who joined us. If you're interested in learning more about the state archives, you can visit archives.nysed.gov. And if you're interested in learning more about the Archives Partnership Trust, that website is nysarchivestrust.org. It's our privilege to make these events available to you and to keep New York State's history alive. If you're interested in the content we create and you have ideas for future programming, please don't hesitate to send us an email at aptrust@nysed.gov. And please don't forget to join us on Tuesday, January 28th at 12:30 p.m. for our next online speaker series, Erie Canal 200, Transforming the Past and Future. You can find out more about that program and register for it for free at nysarchivestrust.org. So thanks again, Erin and Tom. I really appreciate your joining us today.